There was a woman who could walk into the private chambers of kings without carrying a title. Generals lowered their guard around her. Diplomats volunteered secrets they would never have confessed under interrogation. Some believed she was an artist. Others called her a goddess. By the time Europe realized she had become the center of one of history's greatest espionage mysteries, it was already too late. Her name would become synonymous with seduction, with betrayal, with espionage. But more than a century later, historians still can't answer the question that mattered most. Was she truly the world's first legendary female spy? Or was she an innocent woman sacrificed by nations desperate to explain a failing war? The truth begins thousands of miles away from Paris, far from glamorous theaters, far from secret intelligence. It begins with a lonely little girl who spent her childhood dreaming of becoming someone else. Before Europe knew her as an irresistible enchantress, she was simply Margaretha Gertrude Zell, born in the quiet Dutch city of Leeuwarden on August 7, 1876. Nothing about her early years suggested she would one day become one of history's most controversial women. Her father, Adam Zell, was an ambitious businessman who enjoyed success during her childhood. He showered his daughter with expensive clothing, elegant carriages, and comforts few Dutch children experienced. Neighbors admired the prosperous family. Young Margaretha believed that life would always remain beautiful. Then everything collapsed. Her father's investments failed. Bankruptcy destroyed the family's fortune almost overnight. Friends disappeared. Luxury vanished. The household fractured beneath financial pressure. Soon afterward, an even greater tragedy struck. Margaretha's mother died unexpectedly. She was only 15. The girl who had once been surrounded by privilege suddenly found herself shuffled between relatives who viewed her more as a responsibility than a beloved child. Every move forced her further away from the life she remembered. She briefly entered a teacher's training school, hoping education might provide stability. Instead, scandal erupted. The school's headmaster allegedly developed an inappropriate interest in the young student. Whether every accusation was true remains debated, but the outcome is certain. Margaretha left the school in disgrace, even though many historians believe she may have been more victim than culprit. Another door closed. Another future disappeared. She refused to surrender. One afternoon, while reading newspaper advertisements, a single notice caught her attention. A Dutch army officer serving in the Dutch East Indies sought a wife. His name was Captain Rudolf MacLeod. He was nearly 20 years older, a veteran officer, financially secure. To Margaretha, he represented escape. They exchanged letters. Within months, they married. She was only 18. At first, it appeared that fate had finally rewarded her persistence. Soon after the wedding, the couple departed for the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. The voyage lasted weeks across endless oceans. As Europe disappeared beyond the horizon, Margaretha believed she was sailing toward happiness. Instead, she was sailing into another nightmare. Colonial life proved nothing like the romantic adventure she had imagined. The tropical climate was unforgiving. Isolation weighed heavily upon her. More devastating still, her husband was controlling, deeply jealous, and prone to violent outbursts. Arguments became routine. Witnesses later described Rudolf as unpredictable and often abusive. Their marriage deteriorated rapidly. Yet amid the turmoil, Margaretha discovered something extraordinary. The cultures of Java fascinated her. She attended local ceremonies, observed traditional dances, studied elegant movements unlike anything performed in Europe. Rather than treating these traditions as curiosities, she immersed herself in them. She listened. She learned. She remembered every graceful gesture. Without realizing it, she was collecting the pieces of an entirely new identity. Then another tragedy shattered what remained of her family. Their young son Norman died suddenly in 1899 after becoming gravely ill. The exact cause remains uncertain. Many historians believe he was poisoned, possibly by a servant seeking revenge against Rudolf. Others argue complications from medical treatment may have played a role. Whatever the truth, the loss devastated both parents. Their marriage never recovered. Only their daughter, Jean-Louise, survived. Soon afterward, Margaretha returned to Europe with almost nothing. No fortune, no successful marriage, no clear future, just painful memories, and an understanding of distant cultures that very few Europeans possessed. standing on a crowded dock as ships unloaded passengers into a rapidly changing Europe, she made a silent decision. Margaretha Zell had failed. If she wanted a different life, she would have to become someone entirely new. And within only a few years, the woman Europe believed she was would no longer exist. Paris had seen actresses. It had seen opera stars. It had seen royalty. But it had never seen anyone quite like the mysterious woman who now called herself Mata Hari, a Malay phrase often translated as Eye of the Day, or simply, the sun. The name itself sounded ancient, exotic, impossible to verify, and that was precisely its power. When curious reporters asked where she had learned her extraordinary dances, her answers shifted ever so slightly. Sometimes she spoke of sacred temples in Java. Other times she hinted at royal courts in the East. On another evening, she suggested that ancient priests had entrusted her with rituals never witnessed by Europeans. Each version contradicted the last. Oddly, no one seemed to care, because every story made her even more fascinating. Europe wasn't looking for facts. It wanted fantasy. Mata Hari understood human psychology long before intelligence agencies ever would. People willingly surrendered skepticism when mystery was wrapped in beauty. Her first major performances stunned Paris. She entered the stage slowly, almost silently. No dramatic orchestra, no elaborate scenery, only flickering candlelight, incense drifting through the theater, and an elegant figure draped in shimmering silks and jeweled ornaments inspired by Southeast Asian traditions. Every movement appeared deliberate, graceful, hypnotic. Rather than performing for applause, she danced as though completing an ancient ceremony. The audience forgot they were watching theater. Many believed they were witnessing something sacred. Within months, newspapers couldn't stop talking about her. Photographers begged for portraits. Fashion designers copied her jewelry. The wealthiest families invited her into salons where politicians, diplomats, bankers, and aristocrats gathered after midnight. Those private rooms mattered far more than the theaters, because that was where Europe's future was quietly being negotiated. One evening she dined beside a French cavalry officer. The next week, she shared champagne with a German industrialist. Later she found herself seated across from a Russian nobleman discussing politics over dinner. Every powerful man wanted to impress her, and powerful men often revealed more than they intended. Not because she questioned them, because they wanted her attention. She listened far more than she spoke. Years later, intelligence officers would recognize that as one of the rarest talents an agent could possess. Yet at the time, she wasn't working for anyone. She was simply surviving. Her celebrity spread beyond France. Berlin welcomed her. Vienna admired her. Madrid applauded her. Even cities that criticized her performances privately competed to host them. Money poured in. Luxury returned. The poverty of her childhood felt like another lifetime. But success created another problem. She had become internationally recognizable. Every border official knew her face. Every newspaper followed her movements. Fame opened every door. Yet it also ensured that someone was always watching. Still, Mata Hari refused to slow down. She surrounded herself with officers in decorated uniforms, diplomats carrying confidential portfolios, and wealthy businessmen whose fortunes depended upon governments. She wasn't choosing lovers based on nationality. She chose charm, influence, generosity. That decision would later become one of the greatest accusations against her. Then history changed overnight. June 28, 1914. Gunshots echoed through Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was dead. Within weeks, Europe exploded into war. The elegant parties disappeared. Borders closed. Foreigners suddenly became objects of suspicion. Friends found themselves wearing enemy uniforms. The same officers who had once toasted one another across dinner tables now commanded armies trying to destroy each other. For Mata Hari, everything collapsed once again. The glamorous performances that funded her extravagant lifestyle vanished almost instantly. International travel became restricted. Luxury hotels emptied. Wealthy admirers disappeared into military headquarters. Income dried up faster than anyone expected. For the second time in her life, she faced financial ruin. But this crisis was different. Because somewhere inside the chaos of war, governments had begun searching for people who could cross borders unnoticed. People who spoke multiple languages. People welcomed by military officers from several countries. People no one would immediately suspect. And without realizing it, Mata Hari had spent nearly a decade becoming exactly that person. War has a way of changing reputations overnight. A celebrated performer could become a suspected traitor. A respected businessman could become an informant. And an elegant woman who knew too many powerful men could suddenly become priceless or incredibly dangerous. By 1915, Europe had transformed into a continent ruled by fear. Every government believed spies were everywhere. Railway stations filled with military police. Hotels kept detailed guest registers. Letters were opened. Telegrams were intercepted. Foreign accents invited suspicion. Even harmless conversations inside cafes could end careers. Mata Hari found herself trapped between worlds. She was Dutch. The Netherlands remained neutral. That neutrality allowed her to cross borders that citizens of Britain, France, or Germany often could not. To intelligence officers, that passport looked like an opportunity. French officials were the first to approach her. Captain Georges Ledoux, one of France's senior intelligence officers, understood exactly who stood before him. She wasn't a trained spy. She didn't know cryptography. She had never handled secret codes. But she possessed something far more valuable: access. Very few civilians could sit beside generals at dinner one week, and foreign diplomats the next. Ledoux reportedly suggested that she could serve France simply by observing. Travel normally. Listen carefully. Report unusual conversations. Nothing more. It sounded almost harmless. Almost. At first, Mata Hari hesitated. She had spent years building a glamorous reputation. One mistake could destroy everything. But another reality haunted her. Money. The war had devastated her income. Luxury performances no longer paid what they once had. She also wanted permission to visit a man who had become deeply important to her. A young Russian officer named Vadim Maslov. Unlike many of her previous admirers, Maslov appeared to be someone she genuinely loved. Then devastating news reached Paris. He had been seriously wounded while flying reconnaissance missions for the Russian army. One eye had been permanently damaged. He was recovering in military care. Travel restrictions made visiting him almost impossible. French intelligence hinted they might help if she cooperated. Whether love influenced her decision remains uncertain, but eventually, she agreed. Yet France wasn't the only nation paying attention. German intelligence had watched Mata Hari's travels for years. To them, she represented something equally attractive. A famous Dutch woman, fluent in several languages, comfortable among Europe's elite, able to cross borders few others could. German officers quietly approached her as well. Money changed hands. Later, Mata Hari insisted the payment simply compensated her for expensive belongings confiscated by Germany at the beginning of the war. German records suggested something different. Historians still debate exactly what each side believed they were purchasing. Perhaps neither side fully trusted her. Perhaps she believed she could outsmart them both. Or perhaps she never understood how quickly intelligence services could redefine an ordinary agreement. Suddenly, every journey carried hidden meaning. When she boarded a train for Spain, French officers wondered whom she intended to meet. German handlers wondered what she might learn. British intelligence intercepted diplomatic traffic searching for clues. Without realizing it, Mata Hari had become the center of three competing intelligence services. Madrid soon became one of the most dangerous stages of her life. Officially, she was another glamorous traveler. Unofficially, every conversation mattered. She attended elegant receptions filled with military attaches, diplomats, businessmen, and foreign observers. Champagne flowed. Music played. People relaxed. And relaxed people often talk far too much. She listened carefully. Troop movements, political rumors, naval activity, diplomatic gossip. Some information reached French intelligence. Some meetings were observed by German officials. Whether the intelligence she provided had genuine military value remains fiercely disputed. Most modern historians believe much of it was insignificant. But wartime governments weren't interested in subtle distinctions. Suspicion alone could destroy lives. Then came the moment historians still argue about today. German military attaché Major Arnold Colley sent encrypted radio messages back to Berlin. Inside one transmission appeared an agent designation, H-21. British codebreakers had already begun deciphering many German diplomatic messages. They intercepted the transmission, decoded it, and quietly forwarded the information to Paris. French investigators immediately reached one conclusion. H. 21. Could only be Mata Hari. But one troubling mystery refuses to disappear. German intelligence knew many of their diplomatic codes had become vulnerable. So why use that designation? Was the message genuine? Or had someone deliberately exposed her, knowing Allied intelligence would be listening? If that question has an answer, it remains buried inside history. By early 1917, the game had changed. For months, governments had chased shadows. Now they believed they had found a face. And that face belonged to Mata Hari. She didn't know it yet. But every journey she had taken, every officer she had dined with, every luxury hotel she had checked into, had quietly become evidence. French counterintelligence built a growing file. It wasn't one dramatic revelation. It was dozens of tiny details. Hotel registers, travel permits, witness statements, intercepted telegrams, financial transactions. Standing alone, none of them proved treason. Together, they painted a picture that terrified a nation already bleeding on the battlefields. France had lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Entire villages had disappeared. Families demanded answers. Politicians demanded victories. Newspapers demanded someone to blame. And spies had become the perfect explanation for military failures. Captain Georges Ledoux found himself under enormous pressure. If Mata Hari truly worked for Germany, exposing her would be one of the greatest intelligence victories of the war. If she was innocent, the consequences would be devastating. Yet uncertainty rarely survives wartime. Governments prefer certainty, even when certainty is built on incomplete evidence. Meanwhile, Mata Hari continued believing she could still control events. She traveled confidently through Paris, met acquaintances, visited fashionable restaurants, spoke openly with friends. She had no idea investigators were following nearly every movement. Several plainclothes officers rotated surveillance around the clock. One report noted which cafes she entered. Another recorded whom she greeted. Another listed every visitor to her hotel. She had become the hunted without realizing the chase had already begun. Then came February 13th, 1917. The elegant Hotel Élysée Palace in Paris was unusually quiet that morning. Mata Hari had barely begun her day when police officers knocked at her door. She welcomed them inside, believing it was some misunderstanding. Instead, an arrest warrant was placed before her. She was accused of espionage. The charge sounded almost unbelievable. She reportedly laughed at first. A spy? Me. The smile disappeared as officers began opening drawers, searching luggage, examining letters, jewelry, notebooks, and personal belongings. Every object suddenly carried possible meaning. Receipts became suspicious. Love letters became intelligence contacts. Travel diaries became operational records. Nothing was ordinary anymore. She was transported to St. Lazare prison. Unlike the luxury hotel she had grown accustomed to, the prison offered cold stone walls, iron bars, damp corridors, and endless silence. Her elegant gowns disappeared. Her jewelry vanished into evidence lockers. For the first time in years, she faced complete isolation. Interrogations began almost immediately. Investigators repeatedly returned to the same question. Are you Agent H. 21? She denied deliberately betraying France. Yes. She admitted meeting German officers. Yes. She admitted receiving money. Yes. She admitted knowing military men across Europe. But she insisted those relationships had been personal, not professional. She described herself as a courtesan, a performer, a woman who accepted expensive gifts, not a trained intelligence agent. Some investigators weren't convinced. Others privately admitted the case remained surprisingly weak. Yet public opinion had already moved ahead of the evidence. Newspapers exploded with sensational headlines. The beautiful spy, the seductress who sold France, the woman responsible for thousands of deaths. Each article made the accusations more dramatic. The legend began growing long before any verdict existed. Ironically, the real Mata Hari slowly disappeared beneath the fictional one. Inside her prison cell, she still believed reason would prevail. She requested lawyers, prepared explanations, expected misunderstandings to be corrected. She underestimated something far more dangerous than evidence. A nation desperate for certainty. And outside those prison walls, the trial of the century was already being written. The courtroom was silent, not because the evidence was overwhelming, because everyone already believed they knew the ending. Outside, France was entering one of the darkest periods of the First World War. The disastrous Nivelle offensive had cost tens of thousands of lives. Entire regiments questioned their commanders. Mutinies spread through the French army. Confidence in victory was collapsing. The nation desperately needed heroes. Just as desperately, it needed villains. On July 24, 1917, Mata Hari was brought before a French military tribunal. There was no dramatic public audience. No cheering crowds. Only military judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and stacks of confidential intelligence files. The prosecution presented a devastating portrait. They described her as a master manipulator, a woman who seduced officers from every major European power, a spy who allegedly accepted enormous sums of German money, a woman whose beauty had become a weapon more dangerous than any rifle. One prosecutor declared that countless French soldiers had died because of her betrayal. It was an extraordinary accusation, but proving it would be far more difficult. Much of the government's evidence remained classified. Intercepted communications were summarized rather than fully explained. Several intelligence sources could not be revealed in open court. Witnesses relied on assumptions about her relationships rather than direct proof of espionage. Her defense attorney struggled to respond. Without access to the complete intelligence files, how could he challenge evidence he was barely allowed to examine? Mata Hari listened quietly. Then she stood. Her voice remained steady. I am a courtesan. She did not deny accepting expensive gifts. She did not deny loving military officers. She did not deny enjoying luxury. But a spy? She insisted. Never. She admitted accepting German money years earlier. Her explanation never changed. Germany had confiscated valuable property belonging to her at the beginning of the war. She believed the payment represented compensation, not espionage wages. The court viewed it differently. Captain Georges Ledoux himself testified. Ironically, the very intelligence officer who had once tried to recruit her now described her as dangerous. Historians still debate whether Ledoux genuinely believed she was guilty or whether wartime political pressure influenced his testimony. The answer remains uncertain. As the trial continued, one uncomfortable fact emerged. Very little evidence showed that Mata Hari had actually delivered military secrets that caused measurable damage. Modern historians who later examined surviving records reached strikingly different conclusions. Some believe she occasionally passed minor information while exaggerating her own importance. Others argue she accepted money from multiple governments without seriously spying for any of them. Several respected scholars conclude she was largely ineffective as an intelligence asset, an amateur caught inside a professional world she never fully understood. But the judges weren't writing history. They were making a wartime decision. On July 25, 1917, the verdict arrived. Guilty. The sentence: death by firing squad. Mata Hari barely reacted. Witnesses recalled remarkable composure. Perhaps she believed an appeal would save her. After all, she remained internationally famous. Surely someone influential would intervene. Lawyers immediately requested clemency. Supporters appealed to political leaders. Nothing changed. The French government had made its decision. To reverse it now would suggest uncertainty. And wartime governments rarely admit uncertainty. Inside Saint-Lazare prison, Mata Hari waited. Days became weeks. She wrote letters, received occasional visitors, spent long hours reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had carried a bankrupt Dutch girl into the center of Europe's greatest espionage scandal. She still insisted history would eventually understand. But history would have to wait, because dawn was coming, and with it, her final morning. October 15, 1917. Before sunrise, Saint-Lazare prison was almost silent. Only the distant sound of boots echoed through the corridors. A prison guard unlocked her cell. There was no dramatic announcement, no final speech, only a quiet instruction. It is time. Mata Hari rose calmly. Witnesses later recalled that she showed remarkably little fear. She dressed carefully, choosing elegant clothing rather than prison garments. Even now, appearance mattered. Not out of vanity, but dignity. She arranged her dark hat, pulled on a pair of gloves, fastened her coat. For one final morning, she chose to leave the world exactly as she had entered Europe's imagination. Gracefully. Outside, the autumn air was cold. A military vehicle carried her through nearly empty streets toward the military execution grounds at Vincennes, just outside Paris. The journey lasted only minutes. History would remember it forever. When she arrived, 12 French soldiers were already waiting. Each carried a rifle. An officer quietly reviewed the final orders. A priest stepped forward, offering spiritual comfort. She thanked him politely. A nun who had accompanied her during imprisonment embraced her one last time. Then the officers prepared the execution. Tradition required the condemned to be blindfolded. Mata Hari refused. She also refused to be tied to the wooden post. Whether motivated by courage, pride, or acceptance, no one can know with certainty. But every eyewitness agreed on one detail. She stood completely still, looking directly toward the soldiers. One witness later claimed she offered the firing squad a gentle smile. Another insisted she simply stared ahead without expression. The exact moment has passed into legend. Like so much of her life, even her final seconds became impossible to separate from myth. The command rang out. Ready. The rifles lifted. Aim. Silence. Fire. A single volley shattered the morning. Mata Hari collapsed instantly. An officer approached to confirm death with a final pistol shot, following military procedure of the era. She was 41 years old. No family came forward to claim her body. It was transferred to a Paris medical institution for anatomical study, a common practice at the time for unclaimed remains. Even in death, she seemed to disappear. But her story was only beginning. Almost immediately, newspapers transformed her into something larger than life. Some described her as the deadliest female spy who had ever lived. Others portrayed her as an irresistible temptress whose beauty had changed the course of the First World War. Novelists expanded those legends. Hollywood magnified them. Films, biographies, and spy thrillers turned Mata Hari into the blueprint for every glamorous female secret agent who followed. The historical record tells a more complicated story. When intelligence archives gradually became available decades later, many researchers were surprised. The evidence against her appeared far less decisive than wartime headlines had suggested. No document conclusively proved she had delivered intelligence responsible for major Allied military disasters. Several historians concluded she possessed remarkably little access to genuinely valuable military secrets. Others argued that both French and German intelligence services viewed her as useful, but never indispensable. Some even believe Germany deliberately exposed her by transmitting the H-21 designation through channels they suspected Allied cryptographers had already compromised. If true, she wasn't simply arrested. She was abandoned. Modern scholarship remains divided. Was she naive enough to believe she could accept money from rival intelligence services without consequence? Probably. Did she occasionally gather or pass information? Possibly. Was she the master spy portrayed in wartime propaganda? Most historians today say no. Yet perhaps that misses the larger truth. Mata Hari's greatest weapon was never espionage. It was illusion. She understood something that intelligence agencies would later master. People rarely believe what is true. They believe the story that feels most convincing. She created a mysterious identity so powerful that governments, newspapers, and eventually the entire world accepted it as reality. More than a century later, her name still defines the archetype of the femme fatale. Not because history proved she deserved it, but because legends often survive long after facts begin to fade. Some spies disappear into forgotten archives. Mata Hari became immortal, not through the secrets she may have stolen, but through the mystery no one has ever completely solved.